introduce.
Welcome to this NCA 2021 live session entitled Social Justice, Catholic Mission, and Inclusive Mindset. Our presenter is Colleen McCoy-Sika. We invite you to actively engage with this presentation using the messaging and questions functions in the event platform. At the conclusion of the session, you will have the opportunity to complete a post-session evaluation and provide feedback that will also track your participation in our session. If you run into any problems, we invite you to refresh your page or use the help section on the event platform. Colleen, thank you for being with us here at NCA 2021, and we turn it over to you to begin.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to just get ready here. And there we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session today on social justice, Catholic mission, and inclusive mindset. My goal today was to choose the absolute heaviest, almost insurmountable topic that I could possibly talk about. So I may have achieved that. You can be the judge as I talk, okay? I want to just first tell you where I'm coming from, and you have so many choices of what to do with your time this week and today. And so I first want to thank you if you are here live with me. I value your time, and I am going to be coming at this topic from a few different perspectives. So I have been a public and Catholic school teacher. I've been a Catholic school principal, an assistant superintendent for a Catholic diocese. And I'm a parent of a neurotypical child and a not neurotypical child. And I am a lifelong Catholic, and I'm also a lifelong learner. So I don't have all of the answers to everything when it comes to this topic, but I want to share my experiences and hopefully give you something to think about and inspire you on these topics, on this challenging topic. Okay, so let's begin here. What do you see? Do you see on the left side of the screen, do you see a duck's bill? Or do you see rabbit ears? And on the right side of the screen, do you see a rabbit's profile? Or do you see a duck's face? Maybe you've seen this before and you can see both. What about this one? What do you see? You might see an older woman who has her eyes downcast, and you can see the point of her chin and her nose. Again, it's in profile, and she has a feather on her head. Or perhaps you see the profile of a very young woman who is looking over her shoulder. Whatever you saw first, can you now see the other one? And now can you flip back and forth and see both? Okay, how about this one? Do you remember these? So my grandfather was a carpenter, and he used to make these little wooden signs when I was a little kid. And I remember he made them even before I could read, actually. But you know, as I became able to read, I could see there was one that would sit on top of the TV at my grandmother and grandfather's house, and the sign was always there. And after many years of looking at it and not understanding what it was, my grandma explained to me, you have to look at the light. You have to look at the light between the dark spots. And if you look at the light between the dark spots, then you can see the letters, and it says Jesus. And so then once I saw that, then it was the Jesus sign. Once I was able to see it, I couldn't unsee it. And that's kind of the theme of what I want to talk about today is once we recognize certain things, we can't unsee them. We can't unrecognize them. You can't unring the bell, that kind of thing, okay? So the topics to tackle today, I'm going to make some links between the concept of inclusion and social justice, Catholic social teaching, the link between diversity and inclusion, we'll talk about that a little bit, and Catholic schools as institutions of justice, equity, and mission. So let's begin with a story. This is the triangle crayon story, okay? So it's actually a true story about a little girl who I know. We're gonna call her Sarah. And Sarah was a new student at her school. Her mom had taken her to many different schools, and she had been turned away because the schools said, we're not going to be able to teach your daughter, please find another school for her. We just don't have the resources. She'll be better served somewhere else. So finally, mom finds a school where they are excited and welcoming, and Sarah goes to school. And, the first week of school, the school supplies are doled out, right? And part of the school supplies were round crayons. And Sarah has some grip issues, as do many preschool and kindergarten children. Okay, it's very developmentally normal, but particularly for Sarah, she has some issues with her grip. So her mom knows that what works for her is not round crayons, but actually triangle crayons. So mom goes out, she doesn't want Sarah to be upset. So she says, we'll get you what you need. It's not going to be a problem. The teacher won't mind. And Sarah's mom, understanding that she doesn't want any of the other kids to feel like Sarah got something that they didn't, she buys triangle crayons for the whole class. So mom brings several sets of triangle crayons to the classroom and says to the teacher, my daughter needs to use these for her grip. Maybe they'll work for the other kids too. The teacher was delighted, and so shared the triangle crayons with the rest of the students. The kids loved them, and what the teacher loved was that they don't roll off the desk. So just a little tip for you there. So actually, an occupational therapist once told me that preschool and kindergarten children, they're developmentally, they do just have issues with trying to grip round pencils, round markers, anything. And so really triangle crayons act as a natural grip for them. So this was a problem that kind of solved itself for everybody in the classroom. And it was a situation that turned out well, actually, for everybody. The teacher learned something, all the kids got something good, and Sarah was happy. So what's the significance of the story? The significance of the story is that Sarah has Down syndrome. And because Sarah was in the class, all of the children benefited for an upgrade, and the teacher learned something, and just a really happy ending. But Sarah being part of the community is a benefit to everyone, okay? Research actually shows that children with learning disabilities that are included in classrooms have more benefits than, just helping with the grip, though. There is research behind this. Teachers not only learn about how children process information differently, and then they can hone their own teaching skills to be able to have much greater bags of tricks. And I firmly believe that teachers know so much more than they realize, because there aren't any actual magic bullets. I'll say that a couple of times. There's no magic bullet when it comes to special education. It really is learning how all different children learn differently, process information differently, being able to recognize whether children have learning struggles, challenges, differences, or being able to eventually recognize this might be something more serious than just a learning difference, and starting to look at different ways to go down the road of diagnosing a disability as well. But it makes the whole classroom better. So when teachers have more tricks to pull from and understand many different ways that children learn, and really come to appreciate the way the brain processes information in so many different ways by neurotypical and non-neurotypical children, it just makes the classroom a better place for everyone and actually raises achievement. So let's jump into our first. These are just reflection questions that this is what I miss about not being in person with you, is I would love to be able to give you a minute to process this with people around your table. So just think about these for a second. Is it just to do what is right for a single person? And who determines what is right? And I think that's where it gets a little bit sticky. Who is the determinant of what is right? So let's break this down a little bit and look at what we mean by social justice and its connection to Catholic social teaching, okay? So we're talking about justice in terms of distribution of opportunities within a society, or in a school, or in a classroom, right? And Catholic social teaching specifically is a call to family and community, and Catholic social teaching really digs into the dignity of the human person, right? We identify that every single person has dignity and value. And that's the connection. Because if we truly believe that every single human has dignity, and we are here to serve in the ministry of Catholic education, then inclusion is part of that. So inclusion, and again, let's just break that down. What do we mean? The practice or policy of providing access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or mental disabilities and members of other minority groups. So let's connect a little bit. I want to give you a scenario. How about that? I'll give you a scenario. There's a parent. I'll tell you a story that I hear a lot. A story that I hear very frequently. It happens all the time. Has been for many, many years. And I think it's still happening. So a parent applies for admission at her parish Catholic school, okay? She discloses that her child has an IEP, and the child is denied admission. Children with, again, what the parents are told is that the children with learning disabilities may be better served at the public school, where they have more resources to be able to serve the child, right? Sometimes this is true. it is not always true, okay? The child goes to the public school. So she is actually profoundly dyslexic. She's also very articulate, very friendly. She's very well behaved, okay? She passes her classes with C's. She works really hard. She never actually learns how to read because she learns how to compensate and get by. It will be upper junior high and high school when she really hits that wall. And when I'm thinking about the people that really make up this story, that's usually when it happens. At her public school, she does not receive much assistance because she's not necessarily failing. She shows up, she always shows up, good attendance, and she's not a behavior problem. She's a good girl. And outside of school, her mom pays for tutoring out of her pocket, just as she would have paid for tutoring out of pocket if she had gone to the Catholic school, okay? Now, in this particular scenario, the child also does not receive her sacraments with her classmates. She does not attend weekly mass. She does not get to bring up the gifts in church with her classmates. She does not have her 8th grade graduation in a church. She does not have theology of the body integrated throughout her academic subjects. So when we're talking about justice and what is right and doing what is right by a student and encompassing all of that with inclusion and mission, I said this is very heavy stuff, but did we do right by that child? Did this particular Catholic school do what was right for that child? Also, was the Catholic school right to assume that the public school would provide the student the appropriate services? Because I know in my, and I can speak to that in my life, I have made that assumption. And I've also been proven wrong in that assumption. So do you think the family, in the end, stayed at the parish after being excluded from the Ministry of Education? I've experienced this story in many different iterations over time as a principal, as an assistant superintendent, even as a parent, having friends. And I've seen children who need individual attention and structure due to a diagnosis or a disability really thrive in Catholic schools, actually, when their parents understand that need for extra support and how to partner with the school. This is what the school can do. This is what the parent is going to have to do. So when the school and family really work together and find that partnership, find that sweet spot of partnership, and can provide the student with the resources, we really are able to fulfill our mission. And I've seen that happen as well. So, all right, so let's tackle diversity and inclusion. How are diversity and inclusion connected? So what comes to mind when I was putting this presentation together and trying to make this connection between diversity and inclusion, what came to my mind was the concept of representation, okay? And the questions to ponder here for this topic: is representation important? Should a classroom be representative of one's community? And does a lack of diversity limit perspectives and foster racial or cultural bias? That is a very heavy question that I think deserves some conversation that I would wish I could have with you today, but maybe you could have with each other. Does it create a propensity for exclusion when we do not have classrooms that are representative of our full community? Because part of me really thinks that it does create that propensity for exclusion, okay? So let's just dig into representation for a second here. And I wanna give you a practical example and then a classroom example of what I mean by representation. So what is it? It's the action of speaking or acting on behalf of someone, or the state of being represented. So is representation important is one of those big questions to tackle, okay? What I think about in representation is our elected officials. So we actually represent people we actually elect people to represent us. And do we represent them because we, they're people from our neighborhood, people, who have the same beliefs as we do? Are they people who look like us? Are they people that we can relate to in some form or fashion? So what I was able to find in terms of data on this particular topic, the House and Senate are not necessarily representative of the community of the United States, which actually is 51 or 52% female, I believe. And if you look at the other chart on the right there, you can see that in terms of diversity, that there is also not appropriate representation in Congress. Another statistic that I found that was interesting to me is the number of our senators and House representatives that are college educated, and it is 100%, which is also not necessarily representative. So does that matter? Does representation matter? And again, maybe it does matter to you, and maybe it doesn't matter to you, but I want to put it in the context of classrooms, okay? So in a classroom, if we know that 20% of the population has some form of dyslexia, whether it is a very mild to profound dyslexia, 20% of the population, is your school representative of the general population of people that has dyslexia? What about autism? So if 1 in 58 children has autism, how many children in your school or that have come through your classroom have been on the autism spectrum? Is that representation there statistically? And what about Down syndrome? If less than 1%, I think it is still less than 1% of the population has 1% of the students that you have taught through your career or that have come through the school that you work in, do they have Down syndrome? So looking statistically, is our school representative of our communities? Why does it matter? So here's an example that I want to share with you. In 2017, my son and I were standing in the kitchen cooking dinner. We had the news on, and my son caught this particular story, the one that's on the right. Parents demand answers after autistic boy was held on the ground by an officer, and it was actually on the news. And what happened was there was an autistic boy he was a teenage boy who was in a park on the west side of Phoenix, and he was acting kind of erratically, and he was doing something called stimming, if you are familiar with stimming, but there were some erratic movements, and it just looked kind of strange. And the police officers that came onto the scene assumed that he was having some sort of drug overdose, or maybe it could have been a seizure, but the way it was reported on the news was that he was having some sort of reaction to a drug overdose. And so they actually tackled him and handcuffed him and put him on the ground. And the boy was actually trying to communicate with them and tell them what he was doing, and it wasn't happening. The communication wasn't there. The assumption was there was something wrong. He was a danger. We had to take him down. And my son who is actually on the autism spectrum as well, said, "See, Mom, this is why maybe those police officers should have gone to school with people who had autism, and maybe they would have recognized what that was," just kind of like, yeah, good point, Quinn, good point. So the other story that's down on the bottom of the screen here, this is something that just happened here a couple weeks ago. Here at the Phoenix Zoo, there is a family that their 12-year-old son he's pretty profoundly autistic, and has the article says that he has the capacity of about a 1.5 to 2-year-old. And so he also has some sensory issues and doesn't wear a mask for medical reasons. And the zoo officials, the rest of the family, they were all wearing their masks, and there's limited capacity at the zoo, and it's an outdoor venue. So, the family was trying to explain to the zoo staff what the situation was, and they were actually detained. The police were called, and they were escorted off the property, and the child was not allowed to go to the zoo. So maybe we need some more understanding around people with, both of these just happen to be examples of people with autism that popped out in the news here, but it's not just autism, right? It's a lot of different things that we could say, maybe if we had more exposure to the people in our community, we would learn more about what that looks like and how to respond to that and what is reasonable. So let's move on to the next piece, which is the social justice, equity, and mission piece. Let's put it all together. So let's consider the concepts of equity and fairness and equitability. We throw these words around a lot, and we have for years in the special education, universe here, education universe. We use these words a lot, and we really try to differentiate between the concept of equal and equitable, right? And the elephant is there. I want to be really careful. Equal and equitable are political terms right now, and that's not how I'm using them. I am using them in the way that we have been talking about equitability and equality in special education for years. So I don't want anybody to get sidetracked by that. It really is about, actually, it really is about differentiating between not understanding that we don't want to give everybody the same. Equal means we give everybody the same, right? So if there are 3 kids in the classroom that are wearing eyeglasses, well, we want everybody to be equal. So we want to give everybody in the classroom a pair of eyeglasses, right? That doesn't make any sense. The 3 kids that need eyeglasses, which is probably more like 17 kids that need eyeglasses, okay? We want to make sure that they have what they need so that they can access the curriculum, right? So that they can see the whiteboard or they can read their books. But maybe everybody doesn't need glasses. So why would we treat everybody equally and give everybody the same thing? It doesn't make sense, right? But that's equal. Equal is the same. In some cases, if I put glasses on, it's going to screw up my vision and I'm not going to actually be able to see properly. So it's going to hold me back. So in trying to correct a problem by being equal, we're actually creating another problem. So what we want to be is equitable, right? So equitable is when you give each student what they need in order to be able to access the curriculum. In Catholic education, we've never stood for the status quo. We've never wanted to hold people back and say, we want you to stay here. We want everybody to be equal. We want everybody to be the same. What we've always done in Catholic education, and I came up through Catholic schools, 14 years I was educated in Catholic schools, and then I've been working with Catholic schools for my entire career. And one thing that I've always loved about Catholic schools is that we really do push people to achieve their very best, because we believe that each one of us was created by God with unique gifts and talents. And we want every single one of us to be able to give back to God by achieving however we can at the highest level, whatever those gifts and talents are, right? So the next slide, which I had flipped to with all these cute little pictures on it. So whatever it is that our students do well, we want to raise them up. We want to push them forward. And whether that means that a student needs some extra support in order to be able to access the curriculum, or if it means that a student is a high flyer and needs to be pushed forward and needs to be provided with some enrichment, wherever we are with any particular child, we want them to achieve. We don't shy away from merit in Catholic schools. We push everybody to be their best. So in this particular slide where we have students engaging in science and STEM activities, whether it's the arts, geography, maybe it's spirituality and leadership that students are really, really great with. We want to push them. We want to give them opportunities to achieve those things. And I think that's one of the best things about Catholic schools. And we can do that for every single child that comes into our building. We can do that. We are capable of doing that. We are excellent at that. So I just want to address the fact that, as I talk to people around the country about students with disabilities, and, there's always not always, sometimes there's that breath of, oh, but we don't really know how to teach students with disabilities. I think that there are some misconceptions, and I think the first step is always breaking down those misconceptions. And also understanding that students who are neurodiverse bring so many more gifts to the table than I think many people realize, because their brains work a little bit differently and they have gifts in some areas that neurotypical students do not. They bring something to the community that is phenomenal. I also believe, just like in the case with Sarah and the triangle crayons, that children with disabilities, when they are in the classroom, sometimes peers are called upon to really exercise the virtues that we teach in religion class, that we want to practice, right, throughout the course of the school day and in our daily lives. So sometimes when peers are called upon to be peer buddies or, peer supports or whatever the case may be in a school, it requires everyone in the community to step it up and really put the virtues that we teach into practice. So we're gonna close by talking about Catholic mission. Catholic mission includes most of these points. You can look at your school's mission statement, and in some way, shape, or form, I bet these bullet points here are covered in your school's mission statement, right? But Catholic mission includes social justice, dignity of the person, of every person, every human person, inclusion, equity, and care of the whole child. And we've talked about all of those things so far in this presentation. And so again, a couple of heavy reflection questions here for you. Questions that might be a little cringeworthy, that's okay. Is your school mission statement for all children or for some children? When we write school mission statements, if you've ever been a part of the process of creating a new school mission statement or analyzing your school's mission statement, I think that you would all answer that by saying it really is for all children. We always intend for our school mission to, it's our ministry. We do want everyone to be able to achieve the mission of the school, right? So in that regard, then our Catholic schools, and is the Ministry of Catholic Education meant to be exclusive? And I think the answer, and if you read all those mission statements, is there anything in any Catholic school mission statement that might suggest exclusion? Hopefully not. So when we're developing an inclusive mindset, and that is that you can't unsee that social justice issue. You can't unsee exclusive practices at play. You can't, unsee the damage of, telling students we can't serve you here. Once we can actually start looking through the lens of that inclusive mindset, you can really start looking at all aspects of your school and making a determination, how does inclusive mindset impact each one of these particular areas? And I want to look at discipline for just a second, because I know that there are some schools that have like zero tolerance policies, and there used to be many more schools that had zero tolerance. That's kind of going away, but that does not work in an inclusive mindset, okay? So you kind of have to take that mindset and say, okay, we've got to put some flexibility around this. We've got to look at many different ways to come at each one of these things, whether it's classroom and building design, look through the lens of universal design, okay? What about professional development? What kind of professional development are we giving to our teachers around this topic? Hiring and personnel. Are we hiring people and bringing people into the community who have an inclusive mindset? And have you ever thought about that? What are the questions that you ask in an interview to ensure that someone does have an inclusive mindset, or to find out whether or not they do, right? So you can look at all of these things through the lens of inclusive mindset. And I really would be remiss if I did not close with a statement from Pope Benedict, that no child should be denied his or her right to an education and faith, which in turn nurtures the soul of a nation. And if you have any doubts at all about the idea of the harm of that segregation of students causes, I would direct you to the website for the National Board on Full Inclusion. And there is a section on the website, and the web address is right there at the bottom of this slide, that you go check it out and you look at the harmful effects of segregation. I talked a little bit in the beginning about the benefits of inclusion, but on the flip side of that, maybe you could take some time and look at the harmful effects of segregation. In 2019, Crystal Brooks and I put together a guidebook for building inclusive programs. And if you start with Mike Boyle's book, which is also an NCEA book, Ensuring a Place at the Table, so that you understand the why. Mike Boyle really sets the stage for why inclusion in Catholic schools is important and why it's part of the ministry. What Crystal and I did was we picked up from there and we put in place the how. So we created some frameworks and structures around leadership practices and school programs and what that looks like in Catholic schools. And so that's an NCEA book that you can find in the resources if you would like more information. And again, I want to thank you for spending time with me today. I know that was really heavy stuff, and some of the questions that I threw out, hopefully they made you go, and maybe you'll go back and think through some of those. But if you ever want to find me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can email me at inclusionsolutionsforkids.com. It's really, I wish I was in the room with you to say it's really been a pleasure spending time with you, but it has been a pleasure spending time with you, even though I can't see your faces. So thanks so much for your time. Okay, so there is a question in the chat. It says, what advice would you give to a school leader who's hoping to include students with disabilities for the first time? So the first thing, and I get this question a lot, and my always my first response is they're already there. Okay, first of all, they're already there. You already have students with disabilities in your school. So what are you doing to first identify who those students are? Who are the struggling students? What supports do we have in place for those students? And again, kind of going back to that slide about learning challenges. Are these just learning challenges? Is there, is there something else at play, or is it a disability? So digging into the students who are already there in front of you would be the first thing to acknowledge. Secondly, there's a lot around an admissions process for students with disabilities. First of all, if it's a sibling of children you already have in your school and you already have a partnership with the family, it's kind of a no-brainer to go ahead and create an ad hoc situation around that child and do everything that you can to try to include, because you don't want to break up a family. But it really is about making the parents feel comfortable enough to communicate everything with you, because you don't want to be blindsided by anything. So the relationship with the family is the most important thing with any student that has a diagnosis, because the parents need to be able to tell you what the testing report said. They need to be able to tell you what accommodations are in place. What do they do at home? Is there any medication? What is the impact of that? Anything that you could possibly learn about that child, that's where you start. And then you go from there. You go from there, because the more you know, everything that you know and how you build the structure around that child, that's your starting point. And whatever structures you have to put in place from that point forward is what you have to do. And the second part of that is the challenge many principals feel is overwhelming, the cost associated with inclusion, 100%. And the Ministry of Catholic Education isn't cheap, period, at all. What goes along with cost, so it depends, and again, it depends on what state you're in, because if you are in a state that has any kind of legislation around tax credit or assistance for students with disabilities. I happen to be in one of those states. So, and I know it's a blessing because it isn't even close to even half of the states, right? But there are ways to work that out, to be able to make sure, well, if this is what the school can do and what the school cannot do, this is what the parents are going to have to do outside of class. There are foundations that will give grants for personnel. There are some are state specific foundations that will give grants for personnel and equipment for children with disabilities to help the school pay some of those costs. And sometimes it's really just the community rallying and doing a fundraiser to get what is needed in the school. Is it, you know, we've had situations here where we have students that have profound visual or hearing issues, and that requires some very expensive equipment. Sometimes we rally in the community and we find that money, or we tap into a local foundation and we give the school that money so that the child has what they need to be able to access the curriculum. You have to get very creative, partnering with local businesses to see if they will do contributions around this specific area. There are a lot of people you'd be you shouldn't be really surprised, but you'd be surprised if you start asking as a development team, whoever your development person or team might be in your school, to start doing fundraising specifically for children with learning disabilities. Companies and individuals become very surprised. Even here in Phoenix, I encounter this on a regular basis where people are like, wait a minute, you guys, your Catholic schools take kids with disabilities? Why is it a well-kept secret? It doesn't need to be a well-kept secret. So get that information out there into the community, because most people are like, wow, that's great. And I want to help with that. How can I help with that? So you have to start asking though, or you have to create specific fundraising opportunities around that topic. This is what we need in our school. We've got some learners with some, exceptional needs, and we need to be able to support them because that's our mission. So I could probably talk more about that. You could email me and maybe we'll have a phone call. But I guess there are a couple of specific foundations that I can think of that you might be able to write grants to as well. But I have some ideas. What advice do you have for teachers who are pushing the envelope? Are you familiar with the Mustard Seed project out of Loyola, and about the mandate of the USCCB 20 years ago? Yeah. So which is why a couple minutes ago, I specifically stated that start with Mike Boyle's book, dig into some of those, the mandates around Catholic education and its ministry, and what our purpose is, and why we're supposed to be doing this. We are private schools, but we are Catholic schools. And if we are truly Catholic schools, then we have a ministry. We have obligations to our ministry and to our church. And so, yes, again, Mustard Seed, there's some really great professional development around the country. Mustard Seed, of course, is fantastic. But you've got Fire Foundation that just did a conference. There's another conference down in Kentucky that's coming up. You start looking for professional development around this topic too, and you'd be surprised what you'll find, because there are pockets around the country where people are doing this really well. So connect with those people. Speak again a little more about what your thoughts are concerning school and the employees. Oh, a zero tolerance policy. Yeah, I find it interesting and intriguing. And if I understand your comments, that these policies work for the opposite of being inclusive, and that you see schools moving away from policies like this. But correct me if I misunderstood you. Okay, so the question is around my comment about no tolerance policies for discipline. So no tolerance policies for discipline are sometimes too inflexible to be able to allow for some of the behaviors that you need to expect sometimes out of students who have more profound learning disabilities that come with certain behaviors. And that could be a student on the autism spectrum who's moderate or more severe, that may have an outburst, that may, throw something. And, I'm sorry, if we have a no tolerance policy at my school, that child just had a sensory meltdown. And even though I understand that the child had a sensory meltdown, our no tolerance policy says he threw something, he's out. It's those kinds of things. It's that inflexible kind of thinking that really disallows you to be able to be inclusive sometimes. There are certain behaviors sometimes around students with Down syndrome that you have to understand what is sometimes developmentally normal for the student and how to respond in those situations. You've got to expect some out of the box kind of behaviors sometimes if you're going to be fully inclusive, and you just need to respond appropriately. The more you can prepare your community to understand the way certain students are going to behave differently and the reasons why those students behave differently, and make some exceptions for those behaviors. And if your whole community is prepared to be inclusive and understands that, then they would know that you can't, fit everybody into this behavior box. They would know that. So taking time to prepare, I didn't even talk about that. That's a whole other session. But taking a year to prepare a community to be inclusive is another thing. Teaching people about what are different types of disabilities. And sometimes you can see them and sometimes you can't. The face of a child with a disability, it can look like anybody, but then there are some that are more severe. And what does that mean? And what are those behaviors? And why would we bend the rules sometimes? So the flexibility around that. Okay, so how do you help parents realize that you are on their side and want to help their child? Yeah, I think that many parents are worried that if they share the needed info, it will negatively impact their child by labeling them, yes, rather than giving the teacher the insights on how best to help their child. This is something that we have done for years and years and years, that we have stigmatized learning disabilities. We did this. So how do we correct it? It can be corrected actually fairly quickly. One of the schools here in Phoenix that I see that corrected this fairly quickly over the course of a couple of years did it by being very intentional and very loud about the fact that we are inclusive. It is part of our Catholic mission. They took an entire year to prepare the entire community. They got people from the parish on board. They got the board members on board. They got students involved, parents involved, so that the entire community understood the fullness of Catholic mission around inclusion, and that there were going to be some students on campus, that there were already some students on campus, and there were going to be more students on campus with some more profound disabilities, that we are going to build a community around, and we're going to support them, and we're going to be their family, and this is how it's going to be. And the more you can walk the talk of that, when you walk the talk of mission, people will trust you. So how do you get parents on your side? For a long time, if parents came to us with IEPs, we'd be like, yeah, I was a principal. I did it too. Okay, I'm not saying I didn't. I'm saying I've learned. I'm saying I've learned, because some of those kids that I sent away would have been better off in my school. So, we make mistakes, we learn. But anyway, again, just that whole preparing relationships with the family, preparing the community, genuine, authentic relationships with parents is the way to go. So Kevin's telling me that I'm running out of time. I would love to talk more if any of you want to reach out. I'm very passionate about this topic, of course. And again, I'm very grateful that you spent some time with me today. So thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And thank you to all of you for attending this live session at NCA 2021. Please make sure to complete the post-session evaluation and use this opportunity to check out our other live and on-demand sessions, our learning lounges, virtual exhibit hall, and so much more. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you again.